The sun hung low over San Miguel like a copper penny someone had left too long on a stove, its heat pressing down on the mining town with the weight of 2 years' drought. Dust devils danced between the weathered buildings, picking up grit from the unpaved main street and flinging it against windows already opaque with accumulated dirt. To the north, the Mogollon Rim stood like a dark wall against the sky, while southward, the desert stretched endlessly, punctuated by tall saguaro cacti standing sentinel in the heat. Mabel Hart wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her forehead. At 22, she had the lean strength of someone who'd learned early that nobody else would carry her burdens. Her dress, once blue but now faded to the color of a winter sky, was patched at the elbows and hem, neat patches that spoke of pride despite poverty. She'd been hauling water from the well behind Steinberg's general store since dawn, each bucket a small victory against the drought that had turned their corner of Arizona territory into a furnace. "Girl, where's that water?" Judd Carver's voice boomed from inside their small adobe house, thick with last night's whiskey and this morning's anger. Mabel didn't hurry her steps. She'd learned that hurrying only made him angrier, gave him something else to complain about. That she was clumsy, that she spilled precious water, that she was trying to show him up with her haste. Better to move steady and give him fewer reasons. The house squatted at the edge of town like a guilty secret, its walls the same red-brown as the earth around it. Inside, it was dark and stifling. Carver sat at the rough wooden table, his bulk making the handmade furniture look child-sized. His face, red and puffy beneath graying hair, turned toward her as she entered. "Took you long enough," he growled, but his attention was already back on the papers spread before him. Bills, IOUs, the written evidence of debts that multiplied faster than rabbits in spring. Mabel poured water into the tin pitcher without comment. She'd learned that silence was armor. Thin, but better than nothing. As she moved past him toward the kitchen area, his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Crowley's coming by later," he said, his grip tight enough to leave marks. "You make yourself scarce. You hear, Silas Crowley." The name alone made her skin crawl. The cattle baron owned half the valley and had his fingers in the other half. When he looked at her during his visits, it was like being sized up at a livestock auction. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, and he released her. Outside, the town was coming alive with the evening's approach. Miners trudged down from the hills, their faces masked with rock dust, their eyes the only clean spots visible. The sound of their boots on the hard-packed earth created a rhythm like a slow heartbeat. Some headed for their small homes, others for the El Cielo Saloon, where Rosita Alvarez served whiskey that could strip paint and occasionally, when she was feeling generous, something that actually resembled food. Mabel had just stepped out to empty the wash water when she heard the commotion. A crowd was gathering near the entrance to the saloon, voices rising in alarm. She could see Jimmy Patterson, one of the younger miners, gesturing wildly. The support beam gave way, the kids pinned under the coal wagon. Without thinking, Mabel hiked up her skirts and ran. The crowd parted as she pushed through, revealing a scene that made her stomach clench. A boy, no more than 10, was trapped beneath an overturned coal wagon. His thin shoulders were visible, but the rest of him was hidden beneath the wagon's weight. His face was pale with pain and fear. "Tommy!" someone cried. The boy's mother, Mabel realized, held back by other women as she struggled to reach her son. The men stood around looking helpless. The wagon was too heavy to lift outright, and every attempt to shift it made the boy cry out. "Need to get leverage," Mabel said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Several men turned to stare at her. "A beam. Under here." She pointed to a spot near the wagon's edge. "Rock it up just enough to pull him free." "Since when do you know about leverage, girl?" That was Ed Turkle, one of the regular drunks. "Since I learned to read," Mabel shot back, already scanning for something to use. "Which puts me one up on you. Ed, A few men chuckled despite the tension. Big Joe, the blacksmith, nodded slowly. "She's right. Pete, grab that timber from behind the trough." They worked quickly, Mabel directing the placement of the beam while keeping one eye on Tommy. The boy was conscious but growing paler by the minute. When they had the beam in position, she knelt beside him. "Tommy, when they lift, you need to help me pull you out. Understand, it's going to hurt, but only for a moment." The boy nodded, tears cutting tracks through the coal dust on his face. "Now," Mabel called. The men heaved, the wagon lifted inches. Just enough. Mabel grabbed Tommy under his arms and pulled. Putting all her strength into it, he screamed, but then he was free, sliding out onto the dusty ground. His leg was bent at an wrong angle. Without hesitation, Mabel tore a strip from her petticoat. "Someone get Doc Briggs," she ordered, but her hands were already moving, checking the boy for other injuries. The break was clean. Thank God. She'd seen worse. "Let me through." The voice was deep, carrying an authority that made the crowd step back instinctively. Sheriff Cole McKinnon stood at the edge of the circle, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the dying light. They called him Wild Cole, though never to his face, a name earned in darker days before he'd picked up the badge. His face was all hard angles beneath the wide brim of his hat, weathered by sun and something else, something that had carved lines around eyes the color of winter sage. His gaze swept the scene, taking in the overturned wagon, the injured boy, and Mabel kneeling in the dust with blood on her hands and determination in her eyes. Their eyes met for a moment, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit who acted while others stood and talked. "Doc's coming," he said, but he was looking at the way Mabel had positioned the boy, the competent way she'd immobilized the leg. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. Mabel kept her attention on Tommy. "My mother was a midwife. You learn things." "Before she died, you mean?" Mabel's hands stilled for just a moment. Everyone knew everyone's business in San Miguel, but hearing it stated so baldly by this dangerous man made her throat tight. "Yes." Doc Briggs arrived then, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and hands that had delivered half the babies and set half the bones in the territory. Althea Briggs was one of the few female doctors west of the Mississippi, and she wore her competence like armor against those who doubted her. "Good work," she said to Mabel, taking in the improvised splint. "Help me get him to my office." As they lifted the boy carefully, Mabel caught sight of movement near the saloon. A group of rough-looking men had appeared, drawn by the commotion. Their leader, a man with red whiskers and cold eyes, watched the proceedings with the interest of a coyote watching chickens. Red Jack Dawson and his gang had been sniffing around San Miguel for weeks, and everyone knew they weren't here for the scenery. Sheriff McKinnon noticed them too. His hand dropped casual-like to the Colt at his hip, and something in his stance shifted, became dangerous. The outlaws got the message. After a long moment, they melted back into the saloon's shadows. Later, after Tommy was settled and his leg properly set, Mabel walked back through the darkening streets. The stars were coming out, hard and bright in the clear desert air. She could smell cooking fires, hear the distant sound of a guitar from the Mexican quarter, the low of cattle from the stock pens at the edge of town. "Miss Hart." She turned to find Sheriff McKinnon behind her, moving quiet as a shadow despite his size. "Sheriff." She waited, wondering what he wanted. Men like him didn't usually notice women like her except to tell them to move along. That was quick thinking back there, and skilled hands. He paused, and she could feel him studying her in the darkness. Town could use more of both. "Town's got what it's got," she said carefully. "Maybe." He touched the brim of his hat. "Evening, Miss Hart." She watched him walk away, his figure merging with the shadows between buildings. There was something about him that made her uneasy, but not in the way Crowley did. This was different, like standing near a banked fire and knowing it could flare up at any moment. When she got home, Carver was passed out at the table, an empty bottle beside him. But there was a new paper among the others, and even in the dim light of the oil lamp, she could make out Crowley's flourishing signature at the bottom. Her blood ran cold as she read. Carver had signed something, promised something to pay his debts. The legal language was twisted and complex, but one line stood out clear: all assets and attachments thereof. In the corner of the room, a carpet bag sat that hadn't been there this morning. Carver's traveling bag. Mabel stood very still, understanding creeping over her like ice water. Whatever Carver had promised Crowley, whatever debt had finally come due, she had a feeling she was about to become part of the payment. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind picked up, rattling the windows with fingers of dust. Tomorrow would bring the sun like a hammer on an anvil. The heat, the drought, the endless struggle to survive in this hard land. But tonight, in the darkness of the small adobe house, Mabel Hart began to plan. She'd learned young that the world was divided into those who took and those who were taken from. If Carver thought he could trade her like a horse or a plot of land, he was about to learn different. She'd shown today she could act when others stood frozen. Tomorrow, she might need to prove it again. The lamp flickered, throwing shadows on the wall like reaching hands. Mabel trimmed the wick and prepared for bed, but sleep would be a long time coming. In the distance, she could hear the tinny piano from El Cielo, the occasional whoop of a drunken miner, the bark of a dog. San Miguel never really slept. It just waited for the next crisis, the next showdown, the next test of who would survive and who would be buried in the growing cemetery on the hill. And in the morning, when Carver woke with his head pounding and his debts still unpaid, he'd find his stepdaughter already up, already working, her face giving nothing away. But behind her calm expression, a storm was building. The drought had lasted 2 years. Something told Mabel her own dry season was about to break, one way or another. The livestock market sat a half-mile outside San Miguel proper, a collection of rough wooden pens and loading chutes that smelled of manure and fear sweat. On market days, the place teemed with activity, ranchers, traders, and speculators, all looking to make their fortune, or at least avoid losing what little they had. But this wasn't market day, and the sparse crowd gathered near the auctioneer's platform had the feel of vultures circling something not quite dead yet. Mabel's wrists were bound with rope that chafed against her skin. Carver gripped her upper arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise as he hauled her through the dust toward the platform. She'd fought when he dragged her from bed before dawn, but a backhanded blow had left her ears ringing and taught her the futility of resistance. Better to save her strength. "Move, girl," Carver growled, though she was keeping pace. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The platform loomed before them, weathered planks that had seen the sale of countless cattle, horses, and now, it seemed, something else entirely. Crowley stood near the auctioneer, a thin smile playing at his lips. He was dressed as always in a black suit that seemed immune to dust, his silver-headed cane catching the morning light. "Ah, Carver, right on time." Crowley's voice was smooth as oil on water. "And you've brought your collateral." Mabel lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing fear, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The auctioneer, a greasy man named Putnam who usually dealt in livestock, shifted nervously. "Mr. Crowley, sir, I ain't sure about this. Selling a person, even for debt settlement." "Labor contract," Crowley corrected smoothly. "Perfectly legal transfer of a labor contract to satisfy outstanding debts. The territorial laws are quite clear on the matter. Mr. Carver owes me $800. His stepdaughter's labor, contracted for a period of 7 years, should more than satisfy that debt." "She ain't agreed to nothing," someone called from the small crowd. Crowley's smile widened. "Mr. Carver, as her legal guardian, has that authority, unless, of course, someone here wishes to dispute his guardianship. His hand moved to rest on the handle of his cane. Everyone knew there was a blade hidden inside. Silence fell over the gathering. Mabel scanned the faces, mostly Crowley's men, a few curious townspeople. And there, near the back, Eben Pike, the freight hauler. His weathered face was unreadable as he watched the proceeding. "Get on with it," Carver muttered, shoving Mabel toward the platform steps. She climbed with as much dignity as she could manage with bound hands. The platform put her on display, elevated above the crowd like a prize heifer. The morning sun beat down, already hot despite the early hour, and she could feel sweat gathering between her shoulder blades. Putnam cleared his throat. We have here a labor contract. 7 years. The girl's young, strong, knows her letters and numbers, can cook clean, 10 sick folks as some of you seen yesterday with the Patterson boy." "She's got spirit too," Crowley added, his eyes never leaving Mabel's face. "That's worth something in this hard country. Shall we start the bidding at, say, $200? $200. One of Crowley's men called out immediately. $250, another added. Mabel understood the game now. Crowley's men would bid the price up, making it seem legitimate, but no real buyer would match them. This was theater, designed to give a veneer of legality to what was really happening. $300, Pike said suddenly, his gravelly voice cutting through the staged bidding. Crowley's smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Pike, I didn't expect you to be interested in domestic help. Need someone who can read and figure for the freight business," Pike said, spitting tobacco juice to the side. "The girl's got learning." $350. Crowley's man countered quickly. $400, Pike said. Mabel watched the freight hauler with growing interest. Eben Pike was known as a hard man but fair, running goods between San Miguel and Tucson. Working for him would be no picnic, but it would be better than whatever Crowley had planned. $500, Crowley said directly, abandoning pretense. Pike shook his head slowly. "That's too rich for my blood." $600, another voice called. A stranger, standing at the edge of the crowd. He wore the rough clothes of a miner, but something about him seemed off. Crowley's eyes narrowed. $700. $800, the stranger countered. Now Crowley looked genuinely annoyed. This wasn't part of his plan. But before he could respond, commotion erupted at the edge of the market. Sheriff McKinnon appeared, badge glinting in the sun, 2 feathers at his side. The Apache tracker moved silent as smoke, his dark eyes taking in the scene. "Interesting gathering," McKinnon said, his voice carrying despite not being raised. "Didn't know we were having a special auction today. All perfectly legal, Sheriff," Crowley said smoothly. "Transfer of a labor contract, the territorial laws—" "I know the laws." McKinnon stepped closer to the platform, and Mabel could see the controlled anger in the set of his shoulders. "Also know they require proper documentation, filed with the territorial office. You got that paperwork." Crowley. "Being prepared as we speak. Then this auction's premature." McKinnon's hand rested on his gun belt, casual but ready. "Can't sell what ain't properly documented." "The debt is due today," Crowley insisted. "Then take it up with the courts." McKinnon's voice brooked no argument. "Everyone clear out. Show's over." For a moment, the tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Crowley's men looked to their boss, hands drifting toward weapons. 2 feathers shifted slightly, and though he carried only a knife, something about his stance made the nearest men step back. "Now, Mr. Pike," Crowley said suddenly, his voice honey-sweet again. "You were interested in the girl's services. Perhaps we could come to an arrangement, private-like. Say, my original offer, the debt cleared for a simple transfer of contract." Pike looked from Crowley to Mabel to the sheriff. "Wagon and Mule," he said finally. "Pardon," I'll take on her labor contract for my freight wagon and the mule. Good wagon. Sturdy. Mule's only 4 years old. Plenty of work left in her. Crowley laughed, a sound like rocks grinding. You're joking. Nope. Pike spat again. That's my offer. Take it or leave it. That wagon and mule together ain't worth $200. Then I guess we don't have a deal. Pike started to turn away. Wait, Carver spoke up, desperation clear in his voice. That's good enough. Clears the debt. Right transfers legal-like. Crowley's face darkened. This wasn't what he'd planned. But with the sheriff watching and the crowd growing restless, his options were limited. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. But I want it done proper. Putnam, make the sale. The auctioneer, sweating profusely now, raised his gavel. Labor contract of 1 Mabel Hart, 7 years, to Mr. Eben Pike for 1 freight wagon and mule. Going once, twice. The gavel fell with a sound like a gunshot. Sold for a wagon and a mule. The words echoed across the market, sharp and final. Mabel felt something inside her break and reshape itself, like a bone being set. She'd been reduced to the value of transportation and a beast of burden. The humiliation burned, but underneath it, cold determination began to form. Pike climbed the platform to claim his purchase. Up close, she could see his eyes were kinder than his rough exterior suggested. Can you really read and figure? He asked quietly. Yes, sir. Good, because I weren't lying about needing help with the books. He produced a knife and cut her bonds. We're leaving for Tucson in an hour. Get your things. I don't have any things, Mabel said simply. Pike nodded. Then we leave now. As they descended from the platform, McKinnon intercepted them. Miss Hart, you all right? She wanted to laugh at the question. All right, she'd just been sold like livestock, but she kept her voice steady. I'm managing sheriff. This ain't over, he said, but he was looking at Crowley when he said it. Territorial law's got provisions about labor contracts, protections. I'll keep that in mind, Mabel said. Pike's wagon waited at the edge of the market, loaded with supplies for Tucson. True to his word, it was a good wagon, solid construction with canvas covering. The mule stood in the traces, ears flicking at flies. Can you handle a rifle? Pike asked as they prepared to leave. I can learn. Good. Road to Tucson's been hit by bandits lately. Red Jack Dawson's bunch, mostly. He handed her a Henry repeater. You ride up front with me. Anyone tries to stop us, you point that at them and look like you mean to use it. As the wagon rolled out of San Miguel, Mabel looked back once. She could see Crowley still at the market, his black-suited figure stark against the dust. Carver had already disappeared, probably heading for the nearest saloon to drink away his guilt or celebrate his cleared debt. They'd gone maybe 5 miles when Pike spoke again. You got grit, girl. Not many would have stood up there with their chin high like that. Didn't see much point in cowering, Mabel replied. Smart too. Pike guided the mule around a deep rut. Listen, I meant what I said about needing help, but I ain't the sort to... Well, you work for me. Nothing more. Understand? Yes, sir. Good, because there's something else you should know. That stranger bidding on you that was one of Red Jack's boys? Crowley's been dealing with them. Word is, trading information about shipments for a cut of what they steal. Mabel absorbed this information. Why tell me? Because if we get hit on this road, it won't be random. They'll be looking for you specifically. Crowley don't like being thwarted. As if his words had summoned them. Riders appeared on the ridge ahead, 5 of them, spreading out to block the road. Red Jack Dawson himself rode center, his red beard bright in the noon sun. Well, Red Jack called out as they approached. Eben Pike, heard you made an interesting purchase this morning. Pike brought the wagon to a halt, hands visible and empty. Just heading to Tucson. Jack, no need for trouble. "Oh, I disagree." Red Jack's eyes found Mabel. "See, Mr. Crowley's awful upset about how things went. Feels he was cheated out of rightful property. Now, he's willing to pay good money to anyone who helps correct that situation." "The girl works for me now," Pike said steadily. "Legal and proper." "Legal?" Red Jack laughed. "That's rich. Tell you what, Pike, you hand her over nice and peaceful like. You can keep your wagon and your life. Seem fair." Mabel's hand found the rifle, but she kept it low, out of sight. Her mind raced. 5 men, all armed. Pike had a scattergun under the seat, but they were outnumbered. Then she remembered something, a trick her mother had taught her about wagon brakes and axle pins. "Mr. Pike," she said quietly, "when I say so, whip that mule hard as you can." Pike gave an almost imperceptible nod. Mabel shifted as if frightened, her hands finding the brake lever and the linchpin that held the wagon tongue to the front axle. If pulled at speed, the wagon would jackknife, creating chaos. "Come on down, girl," Red Jack called. "Don't make this messy." "Now!" Mabel shouted. Several things happened at once. Pike lashed the mule, which lurched forward with a bray. Mabel yanked the pin and threw her weight against the brake. The wagon slewed sideways, the tongue breaking free. Canvas and supplies went flying as the wagon tipped. In the chaos, Mabel grabbed a flour sack and flung it at the nearest rider. It burst in a white cloud, blinding him. Pike had his scattergun out now, firing over the outlaws' heads, adding to the confusion. "The wash," Pike yelled, pointing to a dry riverbed 20 yards away. They ran, Mabel still clutching the rifle. Pike surprisingly spry for his age. Bullets whined overhead. But the flour cloud and scattered supplies had ruined the outlaws' aim. They slid down into the wash just as hoofbeats thundered behind them. The cut was deep, offering cover, and Mabel immediately understood Pike's thinking. Horses would have trouble with the steep sides. "Can't stay here," Pike gasped. "They'll flank us." Mabel was already moving, following the wash's curve. Around the bend, she found what she'd hoped for, a tangle of deadwood from some long-ago flash flood. Working quickly, she used her petticoat to tie several branches together, then soaked it with lamp oil from Pike's emergency supplies. "What are you?" Pike began. "Creating a diversion." She struck a match, and the makeshift torch flared to life. "When they come around that bend, they'll see fire and smoke, might think we're making a stand, or that help's coming." It worked better than she'd hoped. The outlaws, seeing smoke rising and remembering the sheriff's intervention at the market, held back to reassess. In the distance, incredibly, came the sound of galloping horses, lots of them. "That'll be McKinnon," Pike said with something like wonder. "Man's got timing." They heard Red Jack curse colorfully, then the sound of the outlaws retreating. Moments later, Sheriff McKinnon appeared at the wash's edge, 2 feathers beside him and a hastily formed posse behind. "You folks all right?" the sheriff called down. "Thanks to Miss Hart's quick thinking," Pike replied. McKinnon's eyes found Mabel, and something passed across his face. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "Ma'am, seems you've had quite a day." "It's not over yet," Mabel said, still holding the rifle. "Is it, Sheriff?" "No," he agreed. "I don't suppose it is." As they climbed from the wash, Mabel noticed something tied to a broken piece of wagon, her mother's embroidered handkerchief, the one thing she'd managed to keep hidden from Carver all these years. She must have dropped it in the struggle. Now it hung from the wreckage, a small flag of defiance stained with dust and flour. She retrieved it carefully, shaking it clean. The embroidered initials E.H., Elizabeth Hart, were still visible. Her mother had been sold too, in a way, married off to pay her own father's debts. But she'd found ways to maintain her dignity, her sense of self. Miss Hart McKinnon stood nearby, having sent the posse after the fleeing outlaws. This changes things. Attempted robbery, assault. Crowley's connection to Red Jack is more than rumor now. But still hard to prove in court. Mabel said, "Maybe, but it's a start." He paused. "You could come back to town. With what happened here, that labor contract won't hold. No court would enforce it after this." Mabel looked at Pike's overturned wagon, at the scattered supplies that represented his livelihood. Then she looked at the handkerchief in her hand. "Mister, Pike needs help getting to Tucson." She said, "I gave my word I'd work for him. Maybe not for 7 years, but until this debt is settled proper." Pike started to protest, but she cut him off. "You risked your life back there. Didn't have to. That's worth something." "You're an unusual young woman, Miss Hart." McKinnon said, "Just practical. Sheriff. And I've got a feeling this isn't over. Crowley won't let it go, and neither will Red Jack. When they come again, I'd rather face them on my feet than on my knees." The sheriff touched his hat brim. "Then I'll see you when you get back from Tucson. And Miss Hart, that was fine work with the wagon trick. Where'd you learn that?" For the first time since that morning, Mabel almost smiled. "Books. Sheriff, you'd be amazed what you can learn from books." As the posse helped right Pike's wagon and salvage what supplies they could, Mabel carefully folded her mother's handkerchief and tucked it safe inside her bodice. She'd been sold for a wagon and a mule, reduced to property in the eyes of the law. But she was still standing, still fighting, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a plan was beginning to form. Crowley thought he owned this territory, thought he could buy and sell people like cattle. He was about to learn different. The sun was high now, beating down mercilessly. But Mabel didn't mind. She had work to do, a debt to settle, and promises to keep. The road to Tucson stretched ahead, dangerous and uncertain, but she'd face it standing tall. After all, she'd already survived being sold for a wagon and a mule. Whatever came next, she'd meet it with her chin high and her mother's handkerchief next to her heart. The salt flats stretched before them like a sea of crystallized tears, white crust crackling under the wagon wheels in the late afternoon heat. Pike's repaired wagon creaked with each turn, loaded now with emergency supplies from Tucson and something more valuable, information about Red Jack's hideout that Pike had gleaned from a drunk teamster. "Trail splits ahead," Two Feathers said, materializing beside Cole's horse like a shadow given form. The Apache tracker had joined their pursuit at Cole's request, reading signs in the desert that others would miss. Main group went north, but one wagon, heavy loaded, turned east toward the salt. Cole studied the diverging tracks, his jaw tight. They'd been following Red Jack's gang for 2 days now, ever since word came that another raid had taken several people from a mining camp, including Mabel Hart, who'd been helping Pike deliver supplies. "East leads to Devil's Backbone," Pike said, mopping his face with a bandana. "Maze of canyons. If they took her there—" "They took her there," Cole said with certainty. The handkerchief fluttering from a broken mesquite branch confirmed it. Mabel's, left as a sign. The woman had more sand than most men he'd known. Red Jack's keeping the valuable prisoners separate from the main gang. Easier to negotiate when your bargaining chips aren't all in one place. Two Feathers dismounted, studying the salt crust closely. "3 horses, wagon, moving slow." He looked up, dark eyes meeting Cole's. "Maybe 6 hours ahead, but storm coming from the west. Big one." Cole had seen the clouds building, purple-black towers that promised the kind of violent weather that turned arroyos into death traps. But waiting meant losing the trail. Maybe losing Mabel and whoever else Red Jack had taken. "We push on," he decided. "Pike, you take the wagon back to town. Get Doc Briggs ready. We'll likely need her. Two Feathers and I will—" "Like hell," Pike interrupted. "That girl saved my bacon on the Tucson road. I'm seeing this through." Meanwhile, miles ahead in the labyrinth of Devil's Backbone, Mabel worked at the ropes binding her wrists, using a sharp edge of rock when her captors weren't looking. The covered wagon jolted over stones, its human cargo huddled in misery herself. A young Mexican woman named Rosa, and worst of all, 10-year-old Sally Morrison, daughter of a stamp mill operator. "My papa will come," Sally whispered for the 100th time, curled against Mabel's side. "He'll bring men and guns and—" "Hush, sweet girl," Mabel soothed. Though her own throat was parched, they'd had no water since noon, and the salt dust coated everything, burning their eyes and cracked lips. "Save your strength." 3 outlaws rode guard. Jack Kid Sloan, barely older than Mabel herself, with a festering wound on his gun hand. A vicious brute called Hatchet, and their leader for this detail. Portuguese Bill, who kept eyeing the women in a way that made Mabel's skin crawl. The wagon lurched to a halt in a natural amphitheater of red rock, walls rising on 3 sides. Portuguese Bill climbed down from his horse, stretching. "Make camp here for the night," he ordered. "Kid, you watch the women. Hatchet, gather some greasewood for a fire. Storm's coming, and I want—" He stopped, staring at the western sky. The wall of clouds had advanced faster than expected, lightning flickering in its depths like God's own lanterns. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. "That's a gully washer," Hatchet said nervously. "This canyon's gonna flood." "Then we climb." Portuguese Bill snapped. "Get them out of the wagon, now!" Rough hands hauled the women from the wagon bed. Mabel pretended to stumble, using the movement to palm a small bottle from the medical supplies she'd noticed earlier. Carbolic acid, useful for cleaning wounds, or other things. Kid Sloan, favoring his infected hand, struggled to secure the prisoner's lead ropes. When he reached for Sally, Mabel saw her chance. "That hand's going septic," she said calmly. "See the red streaks running up your arm? That's blood poisoning. You'll lose the arm in 2 days. Be dead in 3. The young outlaw went pale beneath his trail dust. "You're lying." "Am I? I cleaned Tommy Patterson's wound not a week ago. Saved his leg because I knew what to do." She met his frightened eyes. "I can help you, but not if we're all drowned in a flash flood." Kid Sloan wavered, sweat beading on his forehead that had nothing to do with heat. The infection was clearly causing fever, clouding his judgment. "What are you jawing about?" Portuguese Bill demanded. Striding over, "Nothing," Kid started to say, but Mabel cut in. "His hand's infected, badly. He needs treatment or he'll die." She kept her voice matter-of-fact. "I can help, but I need my hands free to work." Portuguese Bill laughed. "Nice try, woman. Kid's tough enough to—" Thunder crashed overhead. So close the ground shook. The first fat raindrop spattered the dust, and within seconds, the deluge began. Water poured from the sky in sheets, turning the canyon floor into a muddy torrent. "The walls!" Hatchet shouted over the rain. "Climb for the walls!" In the chaos that followed, Mabel acted. She splashed the carbolic acid in Portuguese Bill's face, sending him reeling with a scream. Grabbing Sally with one arm and pulling Rosa with her still-bound hands, she lunged for a series of ledges on the canyon wall. "Stop them!" Portuguese Bill roared, pawing at his burning eyes. But Kid Sloan stood frozen, torn between duty and the fever eating at him. That moment's hesitation was all Mabel needed. She boosted Sally up to the first ledge, then helped Rosa scramble after the Mexican woman, despite her own fear. Immediately began pulling Sally higher. Mabel had just gained the ledge herself when she heard it, a sound like distant thunder that didn't stop. Up canyon, a wall of brown water 20 feet high came roaring around the bend, carrying entire trees like matchsticks. "Climb," she screamed. "Everyone climb!" Even the outlaws abandoned everything in their race for high ground. The flood hit seconds later, smashing the wagon to kindling. Sweeping away horses and supplies with equal indifference, Hatchet, slowest to react, disappeared with a strangled cry into the churning mess. Mabel pulled herself higher, the rough rock tearing at her hands. Below, the water rose with terrifying speed, lapping at their heels. Sally sobbed in terror, clinging to Rosa, who murmured prayers in Spanish as she climbed. They found a shallow cave 15 feet up, barely more than a depression in the cliff face, but it was above the flood line. Mabel pushed the others in first, then wedged herself at the entrance, using her body to block Sally from the sight below. Portuguese Bill and Kid Sloan had made it to a ledge on the opposite wall. The older outlaw still clawed at his eyes, cursing steadily. Kid sat hunched over his infected hand, shivering violently despite the warm rain. The flood raged for an hour, gradually subsiding as the storm moved east. In the growing darkness, Mabel could hear Portuguese Bill making plans to cross once the water dropped, to reclaim his prisoners. But she also heard Kid Sloan's labored breathing, saw how he swayed even while sitting. "You need help," she called across the gap. "I wasn't lying about the blood poisoning." "Shut your mouth," Portuguese Bill snarled. But Kid looked up, and in the last light, Mabel could see the fear in his eyes. He was young, maybe 19, just a boy who'd chosen the wrong path. I can feel it," he said weakly. "The poison, it's like fire in my veins." "Because it is," Mabel said. "Your body's fighting a losing battle. But there's still time. I have medical knowledge. I can help you, but you have to choose. Die with him, or live with us." "Don't listen to her. Kid," Portuguese Bill grabbed the younger man's shoulder. "She's lying to save her own skin." The standoff might have continued all night, but new sounds echoed through the canyon, horses picking their way carefully through the flood debris. Men's voices calling, "That's Cole McKinnon." Mabel breathed, recognizing the sheriff's distinctive baritone. Hope flared in her chest. "Sheriff, we're here in the cave." Portuguese Bill went for his gun, but his eyes were still affected by the acid, his draw clumsy. The shot went wide, sparking off stone. What happened next happened fast. Kid Sloan, in the grip of fever and facing his own mortality, made his choice. He grabbed Portuguese Bill's gun arm, wrestling for control. In the struggle, Bill lost his footing on the rain-slick ledge. He fell with a scream, hitting the water below with a splash. The current, still swift, carried him away into the darkness. "Don't shoot," Kid called out weakly. "I'm done, I surrender." Lights appeared below, lanterns. Blessed lanterns! Cole's voice rang out clear and strong. "Mabel, are you hurt?" "We're all right," she called back. "3 of us in the cave, and Kid Sloan across the way. He needs medical attention badly." What followed was a careful rescue. 2 feathers, sure-footed as a mountain goat, brought ropes. They lowered Sally first, into Pike's waiting arms, Rosa next, whispering thanks to every saint she knew. When Mabel reached the ground, Cole was there. His face was stone in the lantern light, but his hands were gentle as he cut her bonds. "You left quite a trail," he said quietly. "Handkerchiefs, bent branches, even scratches on rocks in pattern." 2 Feathers was impressed. "I read about it," Mabel said, suddenly exhausted. "Indian tracking signs. Figured if anyone would be looking, they'd bring someone who could read them." Something shifted in Cole's expression. "You figured right." "They got Kid Sloan down last, the boy barely conscious now, true to her word." Mabel went to work immediately, using what supplies the rescue party had brought. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, lanced the infection, applied a poultice of herbs 2 Feathers provided. "Will he live?" Cole asked, watching her work. "Maybe, if the fever breaks by morning." She looked up at the sheriff. "He made a choice at the end. That should count for something." Cole nodded slowly. "It will. Judge Martinez is fair. Kid testifies about Red Jack's operation. He'll get consideration." As they prepared to move out, seeking better shelter for the night, Mabel found herself walking beside Cole. The storm had passed, leaving stars brilliant in the washed sky. "This isn't over," she said. "Red Jack will want revenge, and Crowley's still pulling strings." "I know." Cole's voice was grim. "But tonight you're safe. All of you are safe. Sometimes that's enough." "Is it?" Mabel looked back at Kid Sloan, carried on a makeshift stretcher, at Sally clinging to Pike's hand, at Rosa clutching a wooden cross. "How many more will Red Jack take before someone stops him?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful, weighted. The law moves slow out here. Too slow, sometimes. But it does move. And with testimony from Kid, maybe from you about what you've seen and heard, you're building a case. "I'm trying." He paused. "You could have run, when the flood hit. Could have saved yourself and left the others." "Could have," Mabel agreed. "But that's not who my mother raised me to be." In the darkness, she thought she saw him smile. "No, I don't suppose it is." They made camp on high ground, under a shelter of canvas and stone. Sally slept curled against Mabel, whimpering occasionally in her dreams. Rosa kept watch over Kid Sloan, cooling his fever with wet cloths, praying softly. And Mabel sat wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, watching the stars wheel overhead, thinking about choices. Kid Sloan had chosen to grab Portuguese Bill's arm instead of drawing his own gun. Cole had chosen to track them through a storm instead of waiting for better weather. She had chosen to risk everything for a child and a woman she barely knew. Small choices, maybe, but out here in the harsh land, small choices could mean the difference between life and death, between becoming the desert's victim or its survivor. The handkerchief was still in her pocket, damp but intact. She pulled it out, smoothing the embroidered initials. Her mother had made choices too, harder ones than Mabel could imagine. Tomorrow would bring new dangers. Red Jack was still out there. Crowley still had his web of influence. The fight was far from over. But tonight, under the vast Arizona sky, surrounded by people who had risked everything to find them, Mabel allowed herself a moment of hope. She had survived being sold, survived kidnapping, survived a flash flood. Whatever came next, she would meet it with the same courage her mother had shown, the same determination that had carried her this far. The desert had tested her and found her worthy. Now it was time to test those who thought they owned it. The ride back to San Miguel stretched under a merciless sun. The rescued party moving slowly through country that seemed determined to kill them even after their escape. Sally Morrison rode with Pike, clinging to the old freighter like a barnacle to a rock. Rosa sat in the wagon bed, tending to Kid Sloan, whose fever had broken at dawn but left him weak as a newborn colt. Mabel rode beside Cole, having refused his offer of the wagon's shade. After what she'd endured, she wanted to see threats coming. The sheriff had given her a spare hat, and beneath its brim, she studied the land with new eyes, noting water signs, defensive positions, escape routes. The desert was teaching her its hard lessons, and she was an apt pupil. "Riders coming," Two Feathers announced from his position as forward scout. "From town, many horses." Cole's hand went to his gun, but Mabel had already spotted what Two Feathers saw, a dust cloud too organized to be hostile. "That's a welcome party," she said. "See how they're staying to the road?" Sure enough, as the riders approached, they resolved into familiar faces. Rosita Alvarez led them, dressed in split riding skirts, a rifle across her saddle. Doc Briggs was there too, medical bag strapped to her horse, and behind them, a good portion of San Miguel's decent citizens. "Mabel," Rosita called out, spurring forward. "Gracias a Dios," when we heard what happened. "How's the girl?" Doc Briggs cut in. All business as she swung down from her mount. "The Morrison child, scared but unharmed," Mabel reported. "Kid Sloan's the one needs attention. Sepsis from an infected wound. I did what I could, but Doc was already moving to the wagon, her practiced hands checking the young outlaw's condition. "Good work on the lancing," she said grudgingly. "Probably saved his life, though why we're saving outlaws now?" "Because he chose to help in the end," Cole said firmly. "And because he's going to testify about Red Jack's operation." The crowd stirred at that. Testimony from inside the gang could be the key to finally bringing down the outlaws, and maybe reaching the men who backed them. "Where's Carver?" Mabel asked suddenly, scanning the faces. Her stepfather was notably absent. Rosita's expression darkened. "Ran off 2 nights ago. Took what he could carry and headed for Mexico. The coward." Good riddance, Mabel thought, though she kept her face neutral. One less chain binding her to the past. The combined party made better time back to town, reaching San Miguel as the afternoon sun painted the buildings golden. Word had spread, and Main Street was lined with onlookers. Some faces showed relief and welcome. Others, Crowley's people, watched with calculating eyes. At Doc Briggs's office, they unloaded Kid Sloan carefully. The young outlaw grabbed Mabel's sleeve as they carried him past. I want to make this right," he whispered. "What Red Jack's planning, where the hideouts are, I'll tell it all." "Rest first," Mabel said. "Getting well is making it right." Cole posted guards at the door, 2 feathers and a deputy named Harris, who'd proven trustworthy. "No one gets to him without my say-so," he ordered. "Not even if they claim to be lawyers." Outside, the crowd was growing. Morrison had arrived to collect Sally, the stamp mill operator openly weeping as he clutched his daughter. He tried to press money into Mabel's hands, but she refused. "Just keep her safe," Mabel said. "That's payment enough." "This town owes you a debt." Morrison insisted. "When the time comes to collect, you remember that." As the crowd dispersed, Cole touched Mabel's elbow. "We need to talk. My office—" The sheriff's office was sparse but clean. Wanted posters covering one wall, a gun rack on another. Cole poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the Civil War. "Crowley's not going to let this go," he said without preamble. "You've embarrassed him publicly, cost him money, and now, with Kid Sloan ready to testify, he'll move against you." "I know." Mabel sipped the bitter coffee, grateful for its heat. "But I'm done running. Done being traded and sold and kidnapped. If Crowley wants a fight, he'll get one." Cole studied her over his cup. "You're not alone in this. The town's splitting. Those who've had enough of Crowley's stranglehold, and those who profit from it. Rosita's organizing the merchants. Doc Briggs has been talking to the miners' wives. Even some of Crowley's own cowboys are having second thoughts." "And you?" Mabel asked. "Where does the law stand?" Something flickered in Cole's eyes. Old pain. Old choices. Where it should have stood from the beginning. "I've sent for a federal marshal. With Kid's testimony and what evidence we can gather, we might be able to bring charges that stick." "Might isn't will." "No," he agreed. "Which is why I'm also teaching anyone who wants to learn how to defend themselves. Starting tomorrow. In the church hall." He paused. "I was hoping you'd help. That trick with the wagon, the way you handled yourself in the canyon, people respect that. They'd listen to you." Before Mabel could answer, commotion erupted outside. They rushed to the window to see a familiar black-suited figure in the street. Crowley sat in his expensive carriage, flanked by hard-faced men. "Sheriff McKinnon," Crowley called out, his voice carrying clearly, "I believe you have property of mine, a young woman whose labor contract was legally purchased." Cole stepped onto the boardwalk, hand resting on his gun. "No property here, Crowley, just citizens of San Miguel." "Citizens?" Crowley laughed. "She's bound by legal contract. I have the papers right here." He waved a document. "Signed and witnessed." "Any contract signed under duress is void," Doc Briggs said, emerging from her office. "And I'd testify to that duress in any court." "As would I," Rosita added. appearing from the saloon with several of her girls behind her, all armed. More townspeople emerged, Morrison and other miners, shopkeepers, even some of the Mexican families from across the tracks. They formed a loose semicircle, facing Crowley's men. "This is rebellion," Crowley snarled. "I own half this town." "Exactly the problem," Mabel said, stepping past Cole to face him directly. "You own things, land, cattle, contracts, but you don't own people. Mr. Crowley. Not anymore." Crowley's face darkened. "You forget yourself, girl. One word from me and every debt in this town gets called in. Every mortgage, every loan. I'll destroy San Miguel before I let a jumped-up orphan dictate terms to me. Then you'll rule over ashes." Morrison called out, "Because we're done bowing to you." The tension stretched taut. Hands hovered near weapons. One wrong move would turn Main Street into a battleground. Then Two Feathers spoke from his position by Doc's door. "Riders coming, many from the south." Everyone turned to look. A dust cloud approached fast, too fast for commerce, too organized for drifters. As they drew closer, Mabel's heart sank. Red Jack Dawson rode at their head. His gang spread out behind him like wolves on the hunt. "Interesting timing," Cole murmured. Red Jack reined up at the edge of the crowd, his red beard split by a gold-toothed grin. "Afternoon, folks. Heard there was some excitement in town. Thought we'd come see the show." "This is a law-abiding town," Cole said. "You're not welcome here." "Dawson." Law-abiding Red Jack laughed. "That's rich. Coming from a sheriff who harbors contract breakers and kidnaps honest businessmen's property." His eyes found Mabel. "Hello again, darling. Missed you something fierce." "The only thing you missed was your chance to ride on," Cole said. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, attempted murder, and robbery. Throw down your weapons." The outlaws laughed. They had the numbers, at least 20 men to the town's scattered defenders. "I don't think so." Red Jack said, "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over the girl and my boy kid Sloan. Then Mr. Crowley here is going to pay us what he owes for our troubles. And then maybe, just maybe, we ride on without burning this dung heap to the ground." "Counteroffer," Mabel said, her voice carrying clearly. "You turn around and ride away. Now, because in about 30 seconds, you're going to be outnumbered." Red Jack's grin widened. "You're bluffing, girl." "Am I?" Mabel pointed to the rooftops. "Tommy Patterson's up there with his father's buffalo rifle. Misses. Chen has her husband's shotgun trained on your left flank. And unless I miss my guess, those aren't clouds coming from the east." Everyone turned. Another dust cloud approached, this one from the mining camps in the hills. Word had spread, and the miners were coming. Tools turned weapons in their hands. "You've united the town against you," Cole said quietly. "Both of you. Crowley with his greed, Red Jack with his violence. And now you face the consequences." The standoff held for long moments. Then one of Red Jack's men broke, wheeling his horse around. "I didn't sign up for no massacre," he called, spurring away. Others followed. The odds were shifting, and everyone could feel it. Red Jack's face contorted with rage. "Crowley, do something!" But Crowley was already backing his carriage away. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You'll all pay for this. Every last one of you." As the cattle baron retreated, Red Jack was left exposed. More miners appeared on Main Street. Shopkeepers emerged with guns. Even the saloon girls had rifles now, covering the outlaws from the upper windows. "Seems your friends have abandoned you," Cole observed. "Last chance to surrender peaceable-like." Red Jack's hand twitched toward his gun, but Two Feathers already had an arrow nocked. The Apache's message was clear. The outlaw might get one shot off, but he wouldn't live to see if it hit. "This ain't finished," Red Jack growled, but he was already turning his horse. "Not by a long shot." The outlaws retreated in disorder, some galloping off immediately. others backing away with guns drawn. The townspeople held their positions until the dust settled and the thunder of hoofbeats faded. Then a cheer went up. People embraced, laughed, cried. They'd stood together and won for now. Inside, Cole said quietly to Mabel, "This was just the first skirmish." Back in the sheriff's office, with trusted people posted as guards, they took stock. Kid Sloan was safe and talking to a deputy, giving details about the gang's operations. The town was aroused and unified as never before, but Crowley will regroup. Doc Briggs said bluntly, "He'll call in debts, hire more guns, and Red Jack won't forget this humiliation." "No," Cole agreed. "Which is why we need to be ready. Mabel, about that offer to help train people." "Yes," she said immediately. "But not just shooting. We need coordination, communication, the women especially. They proved today they'll fight, but they need to know how." "I can help with that," Rosita offered. "My girls know a thing or two about handling rough men." They talked and planned as the sun set, mapping out defenses, organizing watches, preparing for the storm everyone knew was coming. At one point, Cole pulled Mabel aside. "That was brave, what you did out there, but bravery can get you killed." "So can cowardice," she countered. "I've been scared my whole life. Sheriff, scared of Carver, scared of poverty, scared of ending up like my mother, traded to pay someone else's debts. I'm done being scared." He was quiet for a moment. "Your mother would be proud." The words hit harder than any blow. Mabel touched the handkerchief in her pocket, feeling the embroidered initials. "I hope so," she said softly. "I truly hope so." As night fell over San Miguel, the town kept watch. Lanterns burned in windows. Men walked the streets in pairs. And in the sheriff's office, plans took shape for the battle everyone knew was coming. Crowley had threatened to destroy the town rather than lose control. Red Jack had promised vengeance. But something had changed in San Miguel. The people had tasted victory, had remembered what it felt like to stand together instead of alone. And at the center of it, a young woman who'd been sold for a wagon and mule was becoming something neither her enemies nor she herself had expected. A leader, a symbol, a rallying point for all those who'd had enough of being owned. The real fight was just beginning. The makeshift courtroom in San Miguel's wooden church was packed to the rafters. Every bench filled and people standing along the walls. Judge Samuel Winters, a circuit judge known for his fairness, sat behind a table at the front, his gavel fashioned from local mesquite. The territorial seal hung behind him, a reminder that even here, at the edge of civilization, law had meaning. Mabel sat in the front row, her hands folded calmly despite the tension crackling through the air like heat lightning. Beside her, Doc Briggs and Rosita flanked her like bodyguards. Across the aisle, Crowley sat with his hired lawyer from Tucson, a thin man named Pemberton whose reputation was as oily as his hair. "This hearing," Judge Winters began, his voice carrying authority despite his mild appearance, "is to determine the validity of the labor contract binding Miss Mabel Hart to Mr. Silas Crowley, as transferred through Mr. Eben Pike, Your Honor." Pemberton rose smoothly. "The contract is clear and legal. Mr. Carver, as Miss Hart's legal guardian, had every right to assign her labor to satisfy his debts. The transfer to Mr. Pike and subsequent arrangements are all properly documented. Documented fraud is still fraud." A voice called from the back. Morrison, the stamp mill operator, stood firm despite Crowley's glare. "Order," Judge Winters said mildly. "Mr. Pemberton, continue." The lawyer launched into a recitation of territorial law, precedent, and contractual obligations that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so obviously rehearsed. Several people dozed off during the more tedious parts. When he finished, Judge Winters turned to Mabel. "Miss Hart, do you have representation?" "I'll speak for myself, Your Honor." Mabel stood, aware of every eye upon her. "Mr. Pemberton is correct about the law, but he's left out some important facts. She reached into her pocket and produced several papers. These are sworn statements from Dr. Althea Briggs, testifying to the physical abuse I suffered under Judd Carver's guardianship. From Thomas Morrison, describing how I was bound and sold at a livestock auction like property. From Kid Sloan. Objection, Pemberton shot up. That witness is a confessed outlaw. Who's turned state's evidence? Cole said from his position by the door. His testimony is valid. Judge Winters gestured for Mabel to continue. Kid Sloan testifies that Red Jack Dawson's gang was hired by Mr. I. Crowley to kidnap me after the sale to Mr. Pike, that this whole contract business was a scheme to acquire forced labor through quasi-legal means. The crowd stirred. Crowley's face darkened, but he kept silent. Furthermore, Mabel continued, I have here a letter from Mr. Pike, releasing me from any obligations and stating that he was coerced into participating in the original transaction. Lies and fabrications, Pemberton spluttered. Then let's hear from the witnesses directly. Judge Winters decided, Dr. Briggs, please take the stand. What followed was devastating. Doc Briggs described treating Mabel's injuries over the years, the pattern of abuse that would invalidate any guardian's authority. Kid Sloan, brought in under heavy guard and still pale from his ordeal, laid out the conspiracy between Crowley and Red Jack in damning detail. Even Two Feathers testified, describing the tracking signs that proved Mabel had been taken by force. The tide was turning. The crowd's mood shifted from curiosity to anger as the full scope of Crowley's operations became clear. But just as it seemed the hearing would end in Mabel's favor, a tremendous explosion shook the building. The coal depot, someone shouted. It's on fire! Through the church windows, they could see black smoke billowing into the sky. In the confusion that followed, people rushing to fight the fire. No one noticed the side door open until Red Jack's voice cut through the chaos. Nobody move. The outlaw stood in the doorway, gun drawn, 3 of his men behind him. In the scramble to attend the hearing, security had grown lax. Quite a show you put on, girl, Red Jack said, his gold tooth glinting. But court's adjourned. You're coming with us. Like hell, Cole said, but froze as one of the outlaws pressed a gun to Tommy Patterson's head. The boy had been sitting with his mother in the back row. Sheriff, anyone plays hero. The boy gets hurt. Red Jack's smile was cold. Now, Miss Hart, walk nice and slow toward me. Mabel stood, her mind racing. The explosion had been a diversion, drawing away the guards. Classic outlaw tactics. But Red Jack had made one mistake. He was focused on her, not on the other women in the room. I'll come, she said, taking a step forward. Just don't hurt anyone. Mabel! No, Rosita protested, but Mabel caught her eye, then glanced meaningfully at her skirt pocket where the saloon owner kept her derringer. Another step, another. Red Jack's attention was fixed on her, savoring his moment of triumph. Behind him, his men watched the crowd, not noticing Doc Briggs slowly reaching for her medical bag. That's it, Red Jack crooned. Nice and easy. Crowley's paying top dollar for our... Several things happened at once. Mabel dropped to the floor, yelling, "Now!" Rosita's derringer cracked, catching one outlaw in the shoulder. Doc Briggs hurled a bottle of chloroform that shattered against another's face, dropping him instantly. Tommy Patterson, showing the quick thinking Mabel had been teaching him, went completely limp, sliding out of his captor's surprised grip. Cole's gun cleared leather with blinding speed. The church erupted in screams and gunfire. When the smoke cleared seconds later, 2 outlaws were down. Red Jack had a bullet graze across his cheek, and the 4th man had fled. You little witch, Red Jack snarled, raising his gun toward Mabel. The shot that saved her life came from an unexpected source. Judge Winters, mild-mannered and bookish, held a smoking Navy Colt with rock-steady hands. I fought in the Mexican War, Mr. Dawson, he said calmly. And I'll be damned if I let you shoot a witness in my courtroom. Red Jack clutched his wounded gun arm, the weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Cole was on him in an instant, bearing him to the ground. "Check the fire," Judge Winters ordered. Suddenly every inch the military officer he'd once been. "Sheriff, secure these men, and someone see if that boy's all right." Tommy was fine, already being fussed over by his mother and half the women in town. The fire at the coal depot was being controlled, more smoke than flame, designed to cause panic rather than real damage. "Your Honor," Pemberton tried, given the disruption to proceedings. "Sit down, Mr. Pemberton," Judge Winters said coldly. "I've heard enough. Miss Hart, please retake the stand." Still shaking from the confrontation, Mabel returned to her place. "It seems," the judge continued, "that Mr. Crowley's associates have provided the most eloquent argument against his position. No legitimate contract requires enforcement by kidnapping and assault." He raised his gavel. "I hereby declare any and all labor contracts binding Miss Mabel Hart to be null and void. Furthermore, I'm issuing a warrant for Mr. Crowley's arrest on charges of conspiracy, kidnapping, and attempted murder." The gavel fell with a crack like thunder. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Crowley shot to his feet, face purple with rage. "You can't do this. I own this town I own." "You own nothing here," Morrison said, standing tall. "Not anymore." "The bank will call in every loan," Crowley threatened. "Every mortgage, you'll all be ruined." "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "they won't." Everyone turned. A distinguished man in a federal marshal's badge stood there, accompanied by several deputies and a nervous-looking banker. "Marshal Garrett," Cole said with evident relief. "About time." "Took a while to gather the evidence," Garrett replied. "Mr. Crowley, you're under federal arrest for mail fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to violate the Civil Rights Act. Turns out enslaving people through debt manipulation is still illegal, even out here." "And the bank," someone called anxiously. The nervous banker cleared his throat. "The Territorial Board has reviewed Mr. Crowley's loans, given the fraudulent nature of many of them. We're prepared to renegotiate all debts at fair terms." Crowley tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Rosita tripped him with her parasol, sending him sprawling. "That's for every woman you've tried to own," she said with satisfaction. As the federal deputies hauled Crowley away, still shouting threats and promises of revenge, the crowd spilled out of the church into the afternoon sun. The celebration was immediate and heartfelt. Embraces, tears, laughter mixing with the smoke still drifting from the depot. Mabel found herself at the center of it all, accepting congratulations, dodging questions about what she'd do now. Free. The word felt strange in her mouth, like a foreign language she was just learning to speak. "Miss Hart?" Cole appeared at her elbow, his presence creating a small pocket of calm in the chaos. "That was quick thinking in there." "I had good teachers," she said, nodding toward the church where Doc Briggs was tending the wounded outlaws with professional detachment. "And I'm starting to think the books didn't tell the whole story about surviving out here. Books never do." He paused, and she could see him weighing his words. "There's something else. With Crowley gone, the town's going to need new leadership. People who understand justice, not just power." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying San Miguel could use someone like you. Someone who's been on both sides of the law and knows the difference between legal and right." He touched his badge. "I could use a deputy." Mabel stared. "Women can't be deputies. Can't be doctors either, but Doc Briggs manages. Can't run saloons, but Rosita does. Can't stand up to cattle barons and outlaw gangs, but you did." His rare smile appeared. "Besides, I already checked. Territorial law says deputies must be citizens of good character. Nothing about what parts they have to have." The offer hung between them, weighted with possibility. Around them, the celebration continued. But Mabel barely heard it. She thought of her mother, of the choices that had led to this moment, of all the women still trapped by contracts and debts, and men who thought they could own people. "I'll need to learn to shoot better," she said finally. "That can be arranged. And I want to start a school, a real one, for everyone, minors' kids, Mexican children, even reformed outlaws who want to learn their letters. Town could use one. And—" She stopped, seeing the amusement in his eyes. "You've already thought this through. Had some time while you were reorganizing our entire society." The smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "You've shown this town what's possible when people stand together. That's a rare gift. Be ashamed to waste it." Kid Sloane's testimony over the following days revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. Red Jack had been more than just an outlaw. He'd been Crowley's enforcer, keeping the territory in line through fear while Crowley wielded debt like a weapon. Together, they'd built an empire on the backs of those too poor or powerless to fight back. But empires built on sand collapse when the wind changes direction, and the wind in San Miguel had definitely changed. A week later, Mabel stood in the sheriff's office, raising her right hand as Judge Winters administered the deputy's oath. Her badge, specially ordered from Tucson, caught the light from the window. "Do you solemnly swear to uphold the laws of the Arizona Territory, to protect all citizens regardless of station, and to pursue justice without fear or favor?" "I do." "Then, by the authority vested in me, I hereby appoint you Deputy Sheriff of San Miguel." Winters smiled. "Though I suspect you've been doing the job already." Outside, a crowd had gathered. As Mabel emerged, badge pinned to her dress, a cheer went up. Women reached out to touch her, as if her freedom might be contagious. Men who'd once looked through her now touched their hat brims in respect. "Speech," someone called. Mabel looked at the faces, miners and merchants, Mexicans and Anglos, women who'd found their voices and men who'd remembered their courage. Her town, her people. "I was sold for a wagon and mule," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "Some of you were there. You saw me on that platform, bound and bartered like livestock." The crowd grew quiet, remembering. "But I'm standing here today because this town refused to let that be the end of the story. Because when pushed, you pushed back. When threatened, you stood firm. Crowley thought he owned us. Red Jack thought he could terrorize us. They were both wrong." Murmurs of agreement, growing stronger. "The fight's not over. There are other Crowleys out there, other Red Jacks, other women and men trapped by debts and contracts and systems designed to keep them down. But today, in this place, we've proven those systems can be beaten." She touched her badge, feeling its weight. "I promise you this. As long as I wear this star, no one in San Miguel will be bought or sold. No one will be owned, and anyone who tries will learn what this town does to those who treat people like property." The cheer that went up could be heard in the mining camps, in the Mexican quarter, maybe even in the territorial capital. It was the sound of chains breaking, of hope taking root in hard soil. Later, as the sun set behind the Mogollon Rim, Mabel walked the streets of her town. At the school site, volunteers were already clearing ground. Doc Briggs had taken on 2 apprentices, young women eager to learn healing arts. Rosita's saloon had become an unofficial meeting place for what people were calling the resistance, though what they were resisting was the old way of doing things. Cole fell into step beside her as she passed the sheriff's office. "Regrets?" "None." She touched the handkerchief in her pocket, thinking of her mother. "You?" "Only that it took so long." He paused at the corner where they'd first met, where she'd saved Tommy Patterson. "Things are going to get interesting around here." "They already are." In the distance, thunder rumbled. Not a storm, but blasting from the mines as the night shift went to work, the sound of progress, of a territory being carved from raw land by raw people. but also the sound of change, of old orders giving way to new possibilities. Mabel Hart, former property, current deputy, future unknown. Smiled and continued her patrol. The badge was heavy on her chest, but no heavier than the chains she'd already thrown off. And if anyone else tried to sell a human being in her town, they'd learn what Red Jack had learned, what Crowley had learned, what the whole territory was beginning to understand. Some things, and some people, simply weren't for sale. The evening air carried a chill unusual for the season as Mabel supervised the reading class in the newly built schoolhouse. 3 months had passed since she'd pinned on the deputy's badge, and San Miguel had settled into an uneasy peace. Tommy Patterson struggled through a passage about locomotives while Maria Chen helped him sound out the harder words. Even Kid Sloan attended, his testimony having earned him a suspended sentence under the condition he make himself useful to the town. "Deputy Hart." Cole's voice from the doorway made everyone look up. His expression told her this wasn't a social call. "Continue with Chapter 4, she told the class, following him outside. "Crowley's lawyer arrived an hour ago," Cole said without preamble. "He's been released on appeal. Some judge in Tucson who owes him favors." The words hit like a physical blow. "How?" "Money talks. Even in federal custody. He'll have to return for trial. But until then..." Cole's jaw tightened. "There's more. Pike's freight wagon was found overturned 10 miles out. Looks like Red Jack's work." "Is Pike..." "Alive, holed up in an old line shack. 2 Feathers is bringing him in." Cole met her eyes. "Jack left a message carved in the wagon bed. The girl for the old man." Mabel felt the familiar cold creep up her spine, but pushed it down. "He's trying to draw me out." "Yes, and there's something else you need to know." Cole pulled a worn envelope from his pocket. "This came from me last week. I've been wrestling with whether to tell you." She recognized the federal seal. "Official business. Personal." He handed her the letter. "It's about my past, about why Crowley thinks he owns me." Mabel read quickly, her eyes widening. Cole had been part of Crowley's private army during the chaotic years after the Civil War, but he'd turned witness against them after a massacre of Apache families, testifying in secret to federal authorities. His handler had hidden him in San Miguel with a sheriff's badge as cover. "You were undercover," she breathed. Been living the part so long? I forgot it was a part." His laugh was bitter. "Crowley's known all along. Been holding it over my head, knowing if word got out, every outlaw I've put away would come gunning for revenge." "Why tell me now?" "Because he'll use it. Against you. Against the town. You deserve to know what you're really facing." He paused. "And because I'm tired of secrets. Tired of letting the past chain me." Before Mabel could respond, riders appeared on the main street. 2 Feathers led them. Pike slumped in his saddle, blood-stained but conscious. Behind them came something worse. Crowley himself, flanked by hard-faced men she didn't recognize. "Sheriff McKinnon," Crowley called out. "Reining up in front of the jail, I've come to collect what's mine." Cole stepped into the street, Mabel beside him. "You've got no authority here. Crowley." "Oh, but I do." Crowley produced a paper with a flourish. "Writ of recovery. That girl's labor contract was never legally dissolved. The judge who ruled on it had no jurisdiction. This federal order supersedes any territorial ruling." Mabel felt the town gathering behind them. Rosita from the saloon, Doc Briggs from her office, Morrison and the other miners filtering in from the camps. Her students emerged from the schoolhouse, Tommy clutching his reading primer like a weapon. Any federal judge who'd sign that is either bought or blind. Doc Briggs declared. "Careful, Doctor," Crowley warned. "Slander's a serious charge, almost as serious as harboring a fugitive." His cold eyes found Cole. "Isn't that right? Sheriff, or should I say, federal witness number 497. The silence was deafening. Mabel saw the shock ripple through the crowd. saw doubt creep into faces that had trusted Cole. "Yes, friends," Crowley continued, savoring the moment. "Your beloved sheriff is a fraud, a planted witness who's been lying to you all for years. Every arrest he's made, every ruling he's enforced, all of it built on deception." "You're twisting the truth," Cole said steadily. "I was placed here to spy, to betray men who trusted you." Crowley's smile was razor-sharp. "Just like you're betraying these people now by letting them believe you're something you're not." "That's enough." Mabel stepped forward, her badge catching the last rays of sun. "Cole McKinnon's past doesn't change what you are. Crowley, a parasite who feeds on others' desperation." "Such fire," Crowley mocked. "Tell me, Deputy Hart, that's what you call yourself now, isn't it? Does your authority extend to defying federal writs? Does that little star make you above the law?" "The law!" Kid Sloan pushed through the crowd, still pale but determined. "You want to talk about law? How about conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping? I've got names, dates, every crime you ordered through Red Jack." Crowley's men shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons. The crowd pressed closer, the mood ugly and getting uglier. "Listen to you all," Crowley sneered, taking the word of an outlaw, following a fraud and a girl who should be scrubbing floors. "You've forgotten the natural order of things, but I'll remind you." He raised his hand, and Mabel saw what was coming, a signal to hidden gunmen, probably positioned on the roofs. But Two Feathers had seen it too. The Apache's warning whistle pierced the air just as rifle fire erupted from above. People dove for cover as bullets sparked off the dirt. Mabel tackled Tommy to the ground, shielding him with her body as lead whined overhead. "The school," someone screamed. "They're torching the school." Black smoke began pouring from the building Mabel had worked so hard to establish. Her books, the children's primers, their small beacon of hope, all of it going up in flames. "No!" She started to rise, but Cole pulled her back down. "That's what he wants, draw you into the open." But rage was building in her chest, cold and clarifying. These men thought they could burn dreams as easily as buildings, thought fear was stronger than hope. "Kid," she called to Sloan, "you still remember those Apache smoke signals Two Feathers taught you?" The young man nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "Then signal the mines. 3 puffs, pause, 2 more, emergency call." As Kid worked with a blanket and the smoke from an overturned brazier, Mabel turned to Cole. "Remember what you taught me about crossfire? You're not thinking—" "I'm thinking Crowley expects us to cower. Time to disappoint him." She looked at the faces around her, her people, her town. "Who's with me?" The response was immediate. Rosita produced a shotgun from beneath her skirts. Doc Briggs hefted her medical bag, waited. Mabel knew. With lead shot for emergencies just like this. Even gentle misses. Chen held an ancient but serviceable pistol. "Morrison, take your men around behind the hotel," Cole ordered, accepting the moment. "Two Feathers, can you get to those rooftop shooters?" The Apache was already moving, melting into shadows. "And me?" Mabel asked. Cole met her eyes. "You're going to arrest Crowley, publicly, for arson, attempted murder, and violating the peace." It was insane. It was exactly what Crowley wouldn't expect. Mabel stood, brushing dust from her badge. "Mr. Crowley," she called out, "by the authority vested in me as a duly sworn deputy of San Miguel, you're under arrest." Laughter erupted from Crowley's men. Crowley himself seemed stunned by the audacity. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious." She started walking toward him, steady and sure. "You can come quietly, or you can resist. But either way, you're going to answer for burning our school." "Shoot her," Crowley ordered. Nothing happened. His men were looking around nervously, realizing their rooftop support had gone silent, realizing too that the smoke signals had worked. Miners were pouring into town, surrounding them. Seems your hired guns have abandoned you, Mabel observed. Just like at the hearing, you never do your own dirty work. Do you? I don't need to. Crowley drew his own gun, a nickel-plated piece more for show than use. I'll put you down myself. You jumped up. The shot came from behind him. Pike, wounded and wavering but still mounted, held a smoking rifle. Crowley's fancy pistol went spinning into the dirt. That's for wrecking my wagon, Pike said conversationally. Crowley clutched his bleeding hand, face contorted with rage and pain. His remaining men threw down their weapons as the crowd closed in. No longer a mob, but a community defending itself. This isn't over, Crowley snarled as Morrison and others bound his hands. My lawyers will have me out within the week. I'll burn this whole town. I'll see every last one of you. You'll see the inside of a cell, Marshal Garrett said, riding in with a contingent of federal deputies. Got your wire. Sheriff McKinnon, been tracking Mr. Crowley since he left custody, violating terms of release, attempted murder of federal witnesses, arson. He smiled grimly. Judge in Tucson's going to have some explaining to do. As they dragged Crowley away, still ranting, Mabel felt suddenly exhausted. The schoolhouse was a total loss, smoke still rising from its ruins. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding, dealing with Crowley's remaining influence, facing whatever Red Jack planned next. Mabel. Cole stood beside her, watching the flames. About what Crowley said, about me being a man who chose justice over comfort, who risked everything to stop a massacre. She turned to face him. Sounds like sheriff material to me. Something shifted in his expression, walls coming down that had been up for years. I've been running from that past so long, I forgot why I was running in the first place. Maybe it's time to stop running. She was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way the firelight caught in his eyes. Both of us. He reached out, brushing soot from her cheek. The touch was gentle, asking permission. She didn't pull away. When this is over, he said quietly. When Red Jack's caught and the town's safe. The town will never be completely safe. She interrupted. There'll always be another Crowley, another threat. If we wait for perfect peace, we'll wait forever. Then what do you suggest? She thought of her mother, of lives deferred and dreams delayed until it was too late. I suggest we live while we're fighting, build while we're defending, hope while we're struggling. Around them, the town was already organizing bucket brigades to control the fire, plans to rebuild the school bigger and better, guards posted against Red Jack's inevitable response. San Miguel had been tested by fire literally now, and had not broken. Deputy Hart, Tommy Patterson, ran up, clutching something black and charred. I saved it from the school. It was a book, partially burned but readable. McGuffey's Reader, the same primer Mabel had learned from years ago. We can start again, Tommy said earnestly. Even if we have to meet in the saloon or the church or the street, we can keep learning. Mabel hugged the boy, tears threatening for the first time that night. Yes, she said, we can. The girl has the right of it. Judge Winters approached, his coat singed from helping fight the fire. I've been in touch with the territorial governor. In light of recent events, he's prepared to issue a special dispensation. Miss Hart, how would you feel about a judicial appointment assistant magistrate for the district? You'd have real legal authority, not just a deputy's badge. Mabel stared. I'm not a lawyer. Neither are half the judges in the territory, but you understand justice, and more importantly, you understand people. Winters smiled. Think about it. The offer stands. As he walked away, Cole whistled low. Assistant magistrate, that would make you my superior in some matters. Would that bother you? His rare smile appeared. Not in the slightest. A commotion at the edge of town drew their attention. Riders approached, but not threats this time. Women and children from the outlying ranches, bringing food and supplies. Heard you had trouble. One ranch wife called out. Figured you might need help rebuilding. And they came, throughout the night. Ranchers who'd kept neutral. Mexican families who'd held themselves apart. Even some of Crowley's former cowboys looking for honest work. The fire had done what years of talk couldn't shown everyone, that San Miguel's fight was their fight too. Look at that, Rosita said softly, appearing at Mabel's elbow. You did this, brought them together. We all did it. No. Rosita's voice was firm. You stood on that platform, sold like property, and refused to break. You showed us it was possible to stand up. The rest followed. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky crimson and gold, Mabel surveyed the scene. The schoolhouse was gone, but already people were clearing the ground to rebuild. Crowley was in custody, his empire crumbling. Red Jack was still out there, but isolated now, cut off from his support. And she stood in the middle of it all, former property, current deputy, future magistrate. The girl sold for a wagon and mule who'd become the cornerstone of her community's resistance. What now? Cole asked, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. Now we build, Mabel said, a school that won't burn, a town that won't bow, a future that belongs to all of us. And us, the question was quiet, meant only for her. She turned to face him fully, this complicated man with his hidden past and his hard-won honor. Now we stop letting yesterday dictate tomorrow. He kissed her then, there in the smoky dawn with half the town watching and not caring. It wasn't the stuff of dime novels, no swooning or grand declarations. Just two people who'd faced down death and chosen life, who'd seen each other at their worst and decided that was good enough. When they parted, Tommy Patterson was grinning, Kid Sloan was applauding, and Rosita was already taking bets on a wedding date. Back to work, all of you, Mabel called out, but she was smiling. We've got a town to rebuild. As the sun climbed higher, warming the desert and burning away the last of the smoke, San Miguel went to work, and at the heart of it, a young woman with a badge and a book and a growing understanding that sometimes the greatest revenge against those who'd try to own you was simply to live free. Red Jack was still out there. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time since that day on the auction platform, Mabel Hart knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The storm built throughout the day, purple-black clouds massing over Moon Mesa like an army preparing for war. Mabel stood at the edge of the plateau, the wind whipping her hair and the new magistrate papers in her coat pocket. Below, she could see Red Jack's gang arranged in a semicircle, Doc Briggs kneeling in their midst with her hands bound. Time's up, girl, Red Jack's voice carried on the wind. You come down alone, or the good doctor starts losing fingers. Beside her, Cole checked his rifle for the 10th time. You're not going. I have to. Mabel had already made her decision. He'll kill her. He'll kill you both. Maybe. She pulled out the federal warrant Judge Winters had prepared. Or maybe it's time to finish this properly. With law. Not just lead. Two feathers appeared from nowhere, as was his way. The townspeople are in position. Rosita has the women armed and ready. Morrison's miners wait in the ravine. Good. Mabel turned to face the men who'd become her closest allies. When I give the signal. No signal. Cole's voice was flat. I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself. You're not letting me do anything. The words came out sharper than intended. This is my choice. Cole, my fight. Our fight, he corrected. That's what you said. Build together. Fight together. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Mabel looked at the man she'd come to love. Not the romanticized love of novels, but something harder and truer, forged in gunfire and tested by truth. Then come with me, she said, not as sheriff and deputy, as equals. Something passed across his face, surprise, respect, and something deeper. Always. They descended together, the rain intensifying with each step. By the time they reached the mesa floor, it was a steady downpour, turning the ground to mud. Red Jack waited with 20 men, all armed, all watching. Doc Briggs looked pale but defiant, a bruise darkening her cheek. Well, well, Red Jack's gold tooth flashed. The sheriff, too. Even better. Boys, looks like we're having a 2-for-1 sale. Jack Dawson, Mabel called out, her voice carrying despite the rain. By the authority of the federal court, you're under arrest for kidnapping, murder, and conspiracy. The outlaws laughed. Red Jack loudest of all. You still playing lawman? Girl out here. He gestured at the empty mesa. Your little tin badge don't mean nothing here. The law means what we make it mean, Mabel replied. And I'm done letting men like you decide what that is. She pulled out the papers, now getting soaked in the rain. Signed by the territorial governor, witnessed by Federal Marshal Garrett. You can surrender now. Or what? Red Jack drew his gun. You'll talk me to death. Maybe bore me with more speeches about justice. No, Cole said quietly. We'll do this. He fired into the air, 3 shots, evenly spaced. The signal. What happened next would be debated in San Miguel for years to come. From every direction, townspeople emerged from hiding places, behind rocks, in arroyos. Some had even climbed the mesa walls in the dark. Not just men with guns, but women with rifles, teenagers with slings, even Tommy Patterson with his father's old cavalry bugle, blowing charge. But it wasn't the numbers that broke Red Jack's nerve. It was who stood with them. Kid Sloan emerged with the miners, standing tall despite his recent wounds. Sorry, Jack, I've chosen my side. Rosa, the woman they'd rescued from the canyon, led a group of Mexican fighters. For every woman you've stolen, she called in accented English. Even some of Red Jack's own men lowered their weapons, looking uncertain. The town wasn't coming as a mob. They were coming as a community, united and determined. You brought the whole damn town, Red Jack's voice cracked slightly. I didn't bring them, Mabel said. They came because they're tired of men like you. Men who take what they want and hide behind guns. She stepped forward, heedless of the weapon pointed at her. But I'm offering you something Crowley never would have. A chance. A chance, he laughed, but it sounded forced. You think I'm stupid? I think you're trapped. Another step. The rain was falling harder now, lightning illuminating the scene in stark flashes. Crowley's in federal custody. Your supply lines are cut. Half your men are dead or turned witness. You can die here in the mud, or you can live to stand trial. Living in a cage ain't living. Tell that to all the people you've caged. Mabel's voice hardened. All the women you've sold. All the families you've destroyed. Red Jack's gun wavered. Behind him, his men were growing nervous as the circle of townspeople tightened. The rain had become a deluge, making it hard to see, harder to aim. Then Cole spoke, his voice cutting through the storm. 5 years ago, I was you, Jack, working for men like Crowley, taking what I thought was mine, until I saw what that really meant. Burned homes, dead children, lives destroyed for profit. He stepped beside Mabel, water streaming from his hat. I got a second chance, became something better. Not saying you will, but dying in the mud means you'll never know. This is real touching. Red Jack snarled, but his bravado was cracking. The reformed killer and his pet girl playing at justice. That's when Doc Briggs spoke up. She's not anyone's pet, you fool. She's the woman who united this town, who stood up to Crowley, who treated your man-kid's infected wound when she could have let him die. The doctor struggled to her feet, hands still bound but head high. You want to shoot her, you'll have to shoot me first, and then every person here. Stand with us and you die with them, Red Jack shouted at his men. But the outlaws were looking at the faces surrounding them, not hired guns or lawmen, but ordinary people who'd found extraordinary courage. people who'd chosen to risk everything for something beyond themselves. One by one, Red Jack's men dropped their weapons. "No!" Red Jack spun, looking for support, finding none. "I'll kill you all, The shot came from above. Not fatal, but precise, striking Red Jack's gun hand, sending the weapon spinning into the mud. 2 feathers stood on a rocky outcrop, bow in hand, already knocking another arrow. Red Jack fell to his knees, clutching his wounded hand, rain mixing with what might have been tears. "You can't do this. I'm Red Jack Dawson. I own this territory." "You own nothing," Mabel said quietly, kneeling beside him in the mud. "Just like Crowley owned nothing. Just like every man who thinks he can buy and sell people owns nothing." She pulled out the handcuffs Cole had given her, her first official set as magistrate. "Jack Dawson, you're under arrest." As the metal clicked shut, something broke in the outlaw. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. His men were already being secured by the townspeople. No violence needed now that their leader had fallen. "Doc, are you hurt?" Mabel asked, cutting the doctor's bonds. "Nothing that won't heal." Doc Briggs rubbed her wrists. "Though I could have done without the dramatics. Couldn't you have arrested him somewhere dry?" Despite everything, Mabel found herself laughing. Then Cole was laughing, and soon the whole mesa rang with it. The release of tension, the joy of survival, the simple human need to find light in darkness. That's when Reverend Harmon pushed through the crowd. The traveling preacher had arrived the day before, seeking shelter from the storm. He was a thin man with kind eyes and mud now splattered up to his knees. "Seems I've arrived at an auspicious moment," he said, looking at the scene outlaws being arrested, townspeople embracing, rain falling like a benediction. "Though perhaps we should seek shelter before we all catch our deaths." "Wait," Cole said suddenly. He turned to Mabel, rain streaming down his face, and did something that stunned everyone present. He dropped to one knee in the mud. "Mabel Hart," he said, his voice carrying over the storm. "I've spent years running from my past, hiding behind a badge, pretending I was something I wasn't. You showed me how to stand tall, how to face truth without flinching." He pulled something from his pocket, a simple silver ring. Nothing fancy, but polished to a shine. "I had this made from a piece of the bullet that should have killed me 5 years ago. The one that convinced me to change sides, to become better." The rain was easing now, sunlight beginning to break through the clouds to the west. The whole crowd had gone silent, even the arrested outlaws watching with interest. "I'm not asking you to be my wife," Cole continued. "I'm asking you to be my partner, in law, in life, in whatever comes next, equal in all things, bound by choice rather than contract." Mabel stared at him, this complicated man kneeling in the mud, offering not ownership but partnership. Around them, their community waited, the people who'd become family through shared struggle. "Get up," she said softly. His face fell, but he started to rise. "No, I mean," she grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet. "If we're equals, you don't kneel. We stand together or not at all." Understanding dawned in his eyes. They stood facing each other, mud-covered and rain-soaked, surrounded by outlaws and townspeople, the storm clearing around them. "Yes," Mabel said simply. "Partners." The cheer that went up could probably be heard in San Miguel. Rosita was already calculating wedding plans. Tommy Patterson played something approximating a wedding march on his bugle. Even Red Jack, being loaded into a prisoner wagon, muttered something that might have been congratulations. "Well then," Reverend Harmon said, looking amused. "I don't suppose you'd like to make it official, I mean. We're all here, and I am authorized." Mabel looked at Cole, a whole conversation passing between them without words. They'd waited for perfect moments before, for the right time, the safe time. But standing here in the mud with their community around them, having just faced down death and chosen life, what better moment could there be? "Why not?" she said. What followed was the most unusual wedding in territorial history. The bride wore a muddy badge and carried a law book instead of flowers. The groom's best man was an Apache tracker who blessed the union in his own language. The maid of honor was a doctor who kept checking her watch and muttering about the injured who needed tending. Do you, Cole McKinnon, take this woman as your equal partner, to stand beside in law and life, in peace and conflict, until death parts you? I do. Do you, Mabel Hart, take this man as your equal partner, to stand beside in law and life, in building and defending, until death parts you? I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona and the grace of God, I pronounce you partners in marriage. You may. Cole kissed her before the Reverend could finish, lifting her off her feet as the crowd erupted. It was thoroughly improper and absolutely perfect, a moment of joy carved from the heart of struggle. When they finally parted, both breathless, Mabel realized the storm had passed entirely. Sunset light painted Moon Mesa gold, and in the distance, a rainbow arced across the sky. So, she said, still in his arms, what do we do now? Now, Cole set her down gently, his hand finding hers. Now we take these outlaws back to town. We file the paperwork. We rebuild what was burned. We keep working for justice. He squeezed her hand. Together. Together, she agreed. As they organized the journey back, prisoners secured, wounded tended, everyone accounted for. Mabel took a moment to look back at Moon Mesa. This morning, she'd been prepared to die here. Instead, she'd found something worth living for. Not just Cole, though love was part of it. Not just the badge, though justice mattered deeply. But this community that had risen up, these people who'd chosen courage over fear, this proof that change was possible when people stood together. Ready, Mrs. McKinnon? Cole asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice. It's Magistrate Hart McKinnon, she corrected. And yes, I'm ready. As they rode back toward San Miguel, their people around them and their future uncertain, but theirs to shape. Mabel touched the ring on her finger. It was warm, despite the cool evening air, solid and real as the choices that had brought them here. She'd been sold for a wagon and mule, but she'd risen to become something neither buyer nor seller could have imagined. A voice for justice, a partner in love, a cornerstone of community. And this was just the beginning. The sun set over the desert, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, trials to conduct, a town to help heal, a marriage to build alongside everything else. But tonight, riding toward home with her husband beside her and her people around her, Mabel Hart McKinnon allowed herself to believe that sometimes, against all odds, love and justice could triumph, even in a world that tried to sell both. The first drops of rain fell on the tin roof of El Cielo Saloon as Mabel and Cole exchanged vows for the second time, this time properly, with flowers from Rosita's garden and the whole town in attendance. 6 months had passed since Moon Mesa, and San Miguel had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Dearly beloved, Reverend Harmon began, his voice carrying over the packed room. The saloon had been transformed with white ribbons and desert wildflowers, courtesy of the Ladies' Improvement Society that Mabel had helped establish. We gather today to celebrate what was begun in mud and storm, a partnership forged in justice and sealed in love. Mabel wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Mrs. Chen and the sewing circle. The embroidered handkerchief was pinned where her badge usually sat, the initials E.H., a reminder of the woman whose strength had made this moment possible. Cole stood beside her in his best suit, 2 feathers at his side as best man, both men looking slightly uncomfortable in their formal wear. Through the window, Mabel could see the new schoolhouse rising, twice the size of the old one and built of adobe that wouldn't burn. Tommy Patterson and the other children had been helping with the construction, learning arithmetic by calculating supplies and practicing letters by labeling the rooms. "Before we proceed," the Reverend continued, "the bride and groom have asked to say a few words." Cole cleared his throat. "6 months ago, on that mesa, I promised to be your partner. Today, I want to thank you for teaching me what that truly means. Not just standing together, but growing together, building together." He glanced at the assembled crowd. "Leading together." Mabel smiled, remembering their awkward first attempts at shared authority, the arguments over jurisdiction, the confusion when they gave contradictory orders. But they'd learned, adapted, found a rhythm that made them stronger than either could be alone. "When I was sold," Mabel said, her voice steady, "I thought my story was ending, but it was just beginning. Every person in this room helped write the next chapters. Cole, you didn't save me. You stood beside me while I saved myself. And that," she squeezed his hand, "it was worth more than any fairy tale rescue." Kid Sloan, pardoned and now serving as a deputy, wiped his eyes. Doc Briggs pretended she had something in her eye. Even Marshal Garrett, visiting for the occasion, looked moved. The ceremony continued with readings from Morrison and testimonials from those whose lives had changed. Rosa spoke of opening her own seamstress shop with a loan from the new community bank. Pike talked about his freight business expanding now that the roads were safe. Tommy Patterson proudly read a passage about justice from his McGuffey's reader, only stumbling twice. When rings were exchanged, simple gold bands this time, bought with their combined salaries, thunder rolled overhead. But instead of the violent storms of the past, this was the gentle rumble of approaching rain, the kind that would nourish the desert and fill the water tanks. "I now pronounce you, again and officially, husband and wife, partners in all things." Reverend Harmon smiled. "You may kiss your bride, Sheriff." "Actually," Mabel said with a grin, "I'm the senior law officer now, so technically, I should kiss him." The laughter that followed was interrupted by the saloon doors banging open. For a moment, everyone tensed. Old habits died hard. But it was only Eben Pike, rain-soaked and grinning. "Sorry to interrupt," he called out, "but thought you'd want to know. Just got word from Tucson. Crowley's been convicted on all counts. Life sentence. No possibility of appeal." The cheer that went up shook the rafters. Crowley's lawyers had tried every trick, but the testimony of Kid Sloan, combined with the evidence Mabel and Cole had gathered, had been damning. More importantly, his conviction had broken the power of the debt slavery system throughout the territory. "And Red Jack," someone called out. 25 years hard labor," Pike reported. "Seems he found religion in jail. Been teaching other prisoners to read." Mabel felt Cole's arm around her waist, solid and warm. Justice didn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it meant transformation. The chance to become better than you were. The celebration continued late into the night, spilling from the saloon into the streets as the rain fell soft and steady. The new gas lamps Morrison had installed cast warm pools of light, and music drifted from the Mexican Quarter where another celebration was in full swing. Later, much later, Mabel and Cole stood on the hill overlooking San Miguel. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sweet with the scent of creosote. Below them, their town sparkled with lights and life. "Look at that," Cole said softly. 6 months ago, this place was under Crowley's thumb. People were afraid to walk the streets after dark. Now they dance in them. Mabel finished. She could see couples strolling, children playing despite the late hour, shops open and thriving. "We did this, all of us." "What's next?" Magistrate Hart McKinnon, Cole asked, using her full title with gentle teasing. "The railroad's coming," she said thoughtfully. "That'll bring new people, new problems. We need to be ready. Updated laws, better infrastructure, maybe even a proper courthouse." "Always planning." He pulled her closer. "What about tonight?" "Tonight," Mabel looked up at the stars, brilliant in the washed sky. Tonight we're just Cole and Mabel. Tomorrow we can be sheriff and magistrate again. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their town, their home. In the distance, a coyote called, but it was a lonely sound now, not a threat. The desert that had once seemed so hostile had become an ally, its harsh lessons teaching resilience and community. Regrets? Cole asked, echoing his question from months ago. One, Mabel admitted. When he looked concerned, she smiled. I wish my mother could see this, could know that her daughter didn't just survive, she thrived. She knows, Cole said with quiet certainty. Every woman who walks free in this town, every child who learns to read, every person who stands tall instead of bowing, that's her legacy through you. A cool breeze stirred Mabel's hair, carrying the earthy scent of wet sage. Somewhere below, Tommy Patterson was practicing his bugle, the notes floating clear if not quite in tune. Doc Briggs would be in her clinic, probably arguing with her new apprentices about proper suturing techniques. Rosita would be tallying the night's proceeds, already planning the next improvement to her establishment. Life, messy, complicated, beautiful life going on all around them. The Wagon and Mule, Mabel said suddenly. What? Pike still has them. The wagon I was traded for. She turned to face her husband. I want to buy them, set the mule free on good pasture, turn the wagon into something useful, maybe a mobile library for the mining camps. Cole studied her face in the starlight. Turning the symbol of your captivity into a tool of freedom. Something like that. She touched the badge on her dress. She'd pinned it on even for her wedding, a part of who she was now. We can't change what was, but we can transform it. Like you transformed this town, like you transformed me. He kissed her forehead. I'll talk to Pike tomorrow. They made their way back down the hill, passing the new school, the rebuilt sections of town, the courthouse foundation where justice would be dispensed fairly regardless of wealth or status. At their small house, adobe walls and a real wooden floor. Luxury by frontier standards. Cole paused at the threshold. What? Mabel asked. Tradition, he said, and swept her up in his arms to carry her over. Some things are worth keeping. And some are worth changing, she countered, but she was laughing. Inside, their home was simple but warm. Books lined one wall, law texts mixed with novels, practical guides beside poetry. Cole's guns were racked safely high. Mabel's legal papers organized on the desk they shared. 2 chairs by the fire, 2 cups by the stove. Everything speaking of partnership rather than hierarchy. As Cole set her down, Mabel caught sight of the calendar. Tomorrow would bring a full docket, cases to hear, disputes to settle. The endless work of building civilization from raw frontier. The Cattle Association was pushing for new grazing rights. The miners wanted better safety regulations. The growing Mexican population deserved representation in town government. Challenges enough for a lifetime, but tonight... Dance with me, she said suddenly. There's no music. Then we'll make our own. And they did. There in their small home, swaying to rhythms only they could hear while outside the rain began again. Gentle and nourishing. The girl sold for a wagon and Mule had become a woman who helped shape the law. The sheriff with a dangerous past had become a man who upheld justice with steady hands. Together, they'd tamed something wilder than any outlaw. They'd tamed the frontier's casual cruelty, its acceptance of might over right. Not completely, not permanently, but enough to matter. Enough to build on. As they moved together in the lamplight, Mabel thought of all the contracts that had tried to bind her, her stepfather's debts, Crowley's papers, even the expectations of what a woman should be in this hard country. She'd torn them all up, written new ones with her own hand. And the greatest contract of all, the one she'd signed twice now, in mud and in flowers, was the one she'd chosen freely. Partnership, equality, love that strengthened rather than diminished. Outside, San Miguel slept peacefully under the stars. The new school waited for tomorrow's lessons. The jail held only drunks sleeping it off, its cells no longer needed for stolen women and debt slaves. The courthouse foundation sat ready for walls that would shelter justice. Mabel, Cole's voice was soft in her ear. Thank you. For what? For showing me that badges aren't what make us good. That authority means nothing without compassion. That the strongest thing a man can do is stand beside a strong woman. She pulled back to look at him. We showed each other. Then here's to mutual education, he said with a smile. May it never end. They were still dancing when the clock struck midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. It always did. But tonight, in their small circle of light and warmth, the sheriff and the magistrate were simply Cole and Mabel, writing their own story one moment at a time. And if sometimes Mabel touched the ring on her finger and remembered standing on that platform, helpless and humiliated, it only made the present sweeter. She'd been sold for a wagon and mule. She'd risen to become the bride who tamed the territory's wildest sheriff's heart, not through submission, but through partnership. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning, as sleep finally claimed them. The rain continued its patient work outside, turning the desert green with promise, and somewhere in the vast Arizona night, a mule grazed free in good pasture, no longer property but simply alive, simply free. Like the woman who'd once been traded for it, like the town that had chosen justice over fear, like the love between two people who'd learned that the strongest bonds are those we forge ourselves. The end was a beginning. The beginning was a promise, and the promise was this in San Miguel, Arizona territory. In the year of our Lord 1880, no human being would ever again be sold for any price. That was the law. Mabel Hart McKinnon would make sure of it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about this tale. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night, give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means everything